Hello, and welcome to So Many Games, independent video game coverage from a passionate group of people. Please check out everything we do at somanygames.co.uk. My name is Jason, and for episode 21 of the podcast, I welcomed Robin Ward to the podcast. Robin is the founder of Evil Trout, a development studio well known for their work on the Roottrees Are Dead. I was keen to speak with Robin on their latest title, The Incident at Galley House, a reimagining of last year's itch game, Type Help. I was keen to learn why they decided to reimagine Type Help, the processes involved in such a project, and much more. But before we get to this episode's interview, I'd like to ask that if you enjoy this podcast, then we would really appreciate a glorious 5-star rating and review on your preferred platform. It would really help with our discoverability and getting the podcast in front of as many people as possible. Also, please tell anyone you think that would be interested in this podcast or our work. We would really, really, really appreciate it. So with that said, let's jump into my conversation with Robin on the incident of Galley House.
Hi, I'm Robin Ward, founder of Evil Trout. Evil Trout was my pseudonym online, and when it came time to publish some games, I needed a name, and I was like, well, I think this sounds like a game company, so I went with that. I've been into software development for, 25 years, but the last 5 years or so, I've turned and followed my passion of game design and development, and I've worked on 2 titles. One is called The Roottrees Are Dead, and one is called Type Help. Was called Type Help, and the new version is called The Incident at Galley House. Both of those games were not my original design, which is kind of interesting, and I think we might talk about that, but both were free games on itch, where I was really blown away and reached out to the developers and then worked with them to bring those games to Steam in an enhanced way with additional graphics, voice acting, puzzles, and things like that.
Yeah, it's really interesting the type of development that you've kind of landed in. I don't guess we see it very often where we see a development team take on free web-based itch game and then kind of turn it into the kind of projects that you have. You know, how did you kind of land on that specific area, or was it just a bit of an accident?
It was definitely an accident. I had been working on my own game, a game that we still might do. I know Jeremy's the original designer of The Roottrees Are Dead, and he's now along for the ride with Evil Trout. So we had a really good time working together on The Roottrees Are Dead, and so he was also an associate designer on Incident at Galley House, and we plan on working together indefinitely, because you don't always get along and find a really good working relationship. So if you have the opportunity to stick around and make that work, I highly recommend it. So he really likes that game, and so we might do it. But yeah, I had been working on this prototype for about a year, and I was in a situation where I had demoed it to some people, and the feedback wasn't amazing. And that was a bit disheartening to me, as you can probably imagine. Since then, I've realized that it's actually very common to have prototypes that don't fully work, and this is just part of the process, and it's about iterating. But at the time, that was a bit disheartening. And there was a secondary thing that happened, which is that I had broken my arm by accident. I was walking my dog. Dog got spooked by something. I tripped over his leash, and I broke my elbow, and I couldn't work on my game for, I think it was about a month in total. Although over time, every day I got a little bit better, but I was quite limited. So it made me step back from my own game for a month, right after getting the somewhat middling feedback on it. And that was when I played The Roottrees Are Dead, and I really loved it. I had just enough keyboard and mouse abilities to play that game, not enough to program on my own game. And I played that, and I was just like, this game is so good. This game should be as big as Obra Dinn or other puzzle games. And so I approached Jeremy and I said, well, have you considered putting this on Steam? And he said, yeah, but he used it because it was made originally for a game jam. So he was like, I had used AI art for it. At the time, Steam didn't allow AI art. Now they do with a proper disclosure, but Jeremy and I still felt, ethically, we can't charge money for a game that has AI art. We're not putting this on Steam. So I said, well, what if I fund it and help you develop a Steam version? and we'll get it out there. And he was along for the ride. And it's interesting because as I offered it to him, I was like, do I really want to do this? I remember one sleepless night, not sleepless, but I remember going to sleep and I was like, what if he says yes? I'm going to have to do this. And fortunately he did. And we got along really well and made that game, and it was quite a success. So that allowed us to make another game. So it kind of just went from there. And when that game shipped, Jeremy actually had started, because he had started during development of Roottrees Are Dead, a full-time job. And he was fairly preoccupied with that. And so by the time the game shipped, he actually wasn't working with me full-time anymore. He had phased off the project. I finished it. I brought it to market. And I was like, well, what am I going to do next? And I'm like, the odds of me finding, another amazing game on itch like this are like zero. And then I did. It just so happened someone's like, try this game on our Discord, and I tried it and I was like, this game is so good. And at that point Jeremy was considering coming on board with me because the game was successful. And then I was like, what do you think about working on this? And he's like, I don't know, like, what does the game designer feel? So we were talking to William, and William was on board. So yeah, it happened. Amazingly, it happened twice. And part of that's like just a lot of it's circumstance and randomness. But yeah, I think it was also just a combination of, I was like, once Roottrees finished, I was like, what am I going to do next? And then this happened. This just felt really good. It felt the same way to me. It felt like this game is really good and should have a much bigger audience than it does. But now that I've done it twice, I don't know. I'm pretty sure I don't want to do it again. Like, it's super fun. And I like the idea of remastering or reimagining or looking at a game. Like, it's a fun programming puzzle to look at a game and say, well, how would I improve this game? If this was my game, what would I change and what would I add to it? Or what would Robin's version or Evil Trout's version, or because that makes more sense now because there's a bunch of people involved. How would that look? And it's a super fun exercise, but I would like to make an original game or a sequel or something, something that hasn't already been released as a next challenge, just because like, I think it's a more interesting thing to work on for me at this point. Cause I've done it. Like I said, I've done it twice.
Yeah, and there's always the risk, I guess, of being typecast in some ways. It's Evil Trout. That's what they're kind of known for. And although you do an excellent job at these remasters, reimagining, it would be really cool to see something original come from you.
It's interesting. I'm not so worried about being typecast. It's just personally, like I said, I'm like both. Okay. I'm going to speak from a position of immense privilege here, is that both games have done very well. So I have the opportunity to be choosy with my next project. And because of that, I'd like to do something that's challenging and more interesting to me. And Jeremy feels the same way. So like, I think that's what's driving it. I have heard from other people, like some people have said, I love that you're doing this. I love that you're finding these games. And it's interesting because in both cases, like with Roottrees and with the incident at Galley House, I felt strongly that we keep those original versions up on itch. Like they're never going to go away, because I'm big about the preservation of things. I really, really hate it when a company gets bought, they take down their website or whatever. It's like, no, keep it up as long as possible. These games should always be free, and that and then they're not really competing with us. It's like if we haven't made our version better, then we failed. Like if we haven't given you a value proposition over those versions, it has failed. Some people are like, oh, there's so many more games out there that are like this, and it would be great if other people helped make these games more accessible in whatever way. So Type Help was a text game and a phenomenal one, but there's a lot of people who would just never play a game like that. It's just too difficult for them to play a game that has no graphics, no sound, they have to do a lot of reading on a black screen. And I'm not saying that Galley House is better. I think like reimagining is a different way of thinking, or an adaptation. It's like, this is our version of that for that, in part because I think it's a cool way how could the story work with voice acting and with art. It's a fun experiment, but it's also for those people who would never play a text game. And if you look at it that way, there's a lot on itch that could probably have that treatment. And I think some people probably wish I would keep going. but first of all, it's only like, it's amazing it happened twice that I found these two games I was so passionate about that I just desperately wanted to do it. There is no third game, sitting in the wings.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think it's a more interesting challenge for me at this time to do something different.
Yeah, definitely. And like, you don't want to end up just scrolling through itch, just hoping you're going to land on the next thing, and then starting to stress that you're not finding it and everything else. So yeah, it's definitely I feel like it's like on a case by case scenario, isn't it? Like if something crops up that really blows you away again, like type help and the root tree, then maybe so. But until then, it'd be great to see some original work.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I'm definitely not against doing it again. Right now, I'm more interested in trying something new, and part of that is because there isn't a third amazing game, and that's not what I feel. I don't feel like playing a zillion games to try and find one in there. I'd rather, because the other thing is like between Jeremy and I, at least we have a bunch of ideas already. We have at least half a dozen really interesting ideas that we're going to do like a bit of a corporate retreat kind of to celebrate the team, and like William's going to come, and Jay, who's like a developer contributor to the game. We're all going to go to Copenhagen, and one of the things we're going to do is just talk about a bunch of these ideas and see like, are any of these interesting to people? Would you want to work on this? Would you want to be involved? And how could this game look and stuff like that? And that's super exciting to me, because there's only one point in a game's process, where anything is up, anything is on the table. You can do and that's in that idea stage. And then once you start making it concrete, then you really have to start, the more producing, sticking to the course aspect of things.
I'm really grateful that you made this project too, because, for me personally, I'm not heard of Type Help. I didn't know that it kind of existed. So when I received your email in my inbox asking if I'd like to cover the game, learning that it was based on Type Help and everything, I just found it was a really interesting journey and project. And looking at Type Help, and you're right, Type Help is not my not my forte, but with the reimagining that you've created, it made it so much more accessible to me and so many other players that, it's just a really exciting project. And I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more about it.
There's some aspect, like you said, it's not, the accessibility is one aspect. And when I say accessibility, people often think about like, well, can someone with a disability or some kind of, maybe you're colorblind, can you still play the game? But I actually think of accessibility in terms of, there's all these barriers to entry for a game, and like some are the way the game looks, the way the game sounds, your physical interactions with the game. And like, I've even had people, I've read a bunch of the reviews of Galley House, and some say like, oh, you filed it down. It's too smooth. You made it too accessible. And I'm like, well, I can't, I can't be everything to everyone, but there's some things that I just think are really wonderful about a game with graphics and sound and stuff. Like, for example, we've seen a lot of streamers play Galley House, and very few streamers, to my knowledge, play Type Help, because I think it's just a much more difficult thing. Like, you have to read out everything on the screen. Everyone's got to imagine it. Someone can't jump in mid scene and know what's going on. So like, our version is much easier to stream, much for that kind of audience. So I really like that. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any specific questions you have about how we did that.
I think one of the biggest surprises I had when I was looking, at the history, was that kind of like the speed of it all, really. Type Help was released in the beginning of 2025. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you managed to turn around Reimagining to come out, just over a year and a little bit afterwards. So that kind of turnaround really surprised me. I like to think that it was quite an easy development for you, or was it hard? I don't know. Like, the turnaround just surprised me.
It's interesting you say that. So Roottrees took a year virtually from the time. I think it's like I approached Jeremy in November 2024, and we launched that in January 2025. But it was done a little bit earlier than that. Like, it was actually done roughly at Christmas, and we were just told never launch a game at Christmas, like in December, just skip to. So we sat on it for a bit. Yeah, I first played. There's an interesting story here, is because so Roottrees came out, the Steam version, in January 2025, but also Type Help did about 2 weeks after the Roottrees Steam did. And Type Help listed Roottrees as an influence, which is interesting. Now, of course, I've spoken to William since. He hadn't played the Steam version. He had played the original itch version, but it's interesting to think that Roottrees influenced the next game that we worked on. But it took closer to about, I would say, about a year and a half. It was because we started talking to William in about March. I think in April we signed the deal, and then the game was out the following July. So yeah, just over a year. That seems fast, but I do think, I don't know, I do think it's easier to make a game that has already been battle tested. Like we found this with Roottrees as well. It's like when you know the puzzles are work and lots of people have played them, you already know the things you want to change, like the little things that didn't work out, and stuff like that. And it mostly comes down to then production, like building. In both cases, the game was rebuilt in the Godot game engine, contracting the art. For Galley House, one of the biggest endeavors was the voice acting. So for that, we very quickly realized we were out of our limits, or what is this expression, out of our league. We didn't know what we were doing. And we got a recommendation to hire Kirsty Gilmore as a casting and voice director. And she did an incredible job finding all those English actors to, that was the other thing. It's like Jeremy and I are both, he's American and I'm Canadian. And it's like, we know what accents sound good to us, but we don't necessarily know all the regional things or about received pronunciation, which is a thing I learned about. And so that was really great. But I'll actually say it's interesting because I actually felt like it took longer than I thought. Part of it was when we first sat down to discuss making the game. I think we did scope creep it a bunch. We did add more and more to it over time. Like we added, like in the beginning, there was going to be one 3D scene, which is just the living room of the game where the game takes place, like Roottrees. Both of our games have a 3D living room and a computer in it. But over time, we decided to add a second 3D scene, which is the entrance to the house, the first thing the player sees. We added that. That was a bunch of extra work. And then there's things like personal things came up in my life. Like there was a period of time for about, I don't know, 5 months of the game's development where, like, due to personal things in my family, I just was not able to work on the game as much as I would have liked. And that's when we brought in Jay, our contract developer. So yeah, it's interesting. Like a lot of people like, that's so fast, but I'm like, oh, I think we actually went way slower on that one than we could have. And I think it all comes back down to just having an established design. Now, in the case of both games, we did add extra content. So Galley House has only a little bit of extra content compared to Type Help. Roottrees had a significant amount. But in both cases, it uses the same game engine and most of the same mechanics. It just becomes an aspect. Like, so there's the writing, the testing, and the art and the voice. And we had figured out essentially at that point the pipeline. I will say, especially if our next game is from scratch, or even if it's that original game concept I had, it's going to be more than a year this time. Like I'm thinking at least 2 years. 2 years would be a nice amount of time, but I know how long these things take, like to do properly. So I think that's a little. It's going to be unusual to see that we did 2 games in 2 years. I think
you kind of nailed it though at the beginning there, where you said about the beta testing and QA and all that kind of stuff. You could kind of skip the majority of it, which I always assume takes quite a lot of the development time. So yeah, I can understand why it probably took. It seemed quite quick.
Yeah, for both games, I wrote a technical blog post after they launched about how they worked, and for the Galley House one, I wrote. It was really cool having a web-based one. Like the Galley House Type Help was originally written in Twine, and it was web-based, so you could just play it in a browser. Roottrees was a Unity game, so it had a big export and all this stuff. But the web-based aspect made it really easy to share prototypes. And when William was writing the additional content, he used that again. And I really liked that, like to the point where I'm like, I think for future games, if it fits, I'd really like to make a very simple, almost no graphics, web-based, very crude version that we could then have our trusted testers play and test the puzzles first and get all that done before we even enter production. Because I think that would just be a huge benefit to the process to just nail that stuff down in advance.
You mentioned a little bit more about where you added on content, for both games, but a little bit for the incident at Galley House. Like I'm just a little bit intrigued, like apart from that added on content, did you shuffle anything around from the original Type Help order, I guess, of the game, or is it like for like?
I would say Type Help is very similar. There was a few, like by the time we, took the script and imported it into Godot, William had already made some changes. Like even since I beat the game, he had made some small changes to file it down. It was largely the same. What we did do is we kind of wrapped it in a different like narrative device. Like, so in Type Help, you're given a computer and you're typing in file names and you're looking for files in that computer, and the previous detective has left you some notes. But in ours, we got rid of that detective, we got rid of the computer, and we came up with this strange machine that you interact with, and it has knobs and stuff. And that was pretty much all Jeremy, and it all came from a desire that we had. Like I was lamenting to him that Roottrees was very difficult to make work with a controller, and I wish we could have made it work with a controller. And I was like, type help seems to have like a more limited input mechanism. And then he went away, and I was thinking of it, we're going to have a computer with drop down boxes or something. And then he's like, what if it was this cool machine with knobs and dials? And I'm like, I love that idea. And fortunately, William did too. So that was new, and that came out of our desire to make it controller friendly. And then the rest was like, well, what would type help be like if you could see the room you're in? And so then what kind of person are you? Like most of that was not answered in type help. So in Galley House, we're like, okay, we're going to give you a name, we're going to give you a person, and we're going to give you that. So and that leads into the new content. So I'm trying to avoid spoilers here, but like you start the game as a person who's named, and then you're using all that stuff. And then the vast majority of the game are the same scenes. Just with some small tweaks here to the dialogue, like sometimes a voice actor would be like, that sounds totally unnatural. Can we try it this way? And we're like, almost always, of course, but no, that was pretty solid up until, the end of the type help mystery, is virtually the same scenes. I don't think we added any, just very minor changes.
And like you mentioned, the machine and just the general interface of the game, I really appreciated. Because I normally try and avoid games like blueprints or note-taking games. If I hear you need to take excessive notes for a video game, it normally kind of it's a deterrent for me. But I liked how you implemented the systems in Galley's House, where the game kind of took the notes for you and kind of transcribed all the conversations that had occurred up to that point. And everything else was just there, ready to go. Yeah, I just really, really appreciated that as a player, and wondered if that was a hard mechanic to implement into the game.
I would say, a lot of the games developed, so the transcripts of the scenes, that was always in the original, because the original had no voice acting, so it was just reading so a file in type help is the transcript that you see. So we knew that was going to be there. But what we do give you is a lot of mechanics for tracking things. There's a whole interface and a way that it's laid out by, and I think it's very minor spoilers for the game. It's stuff within the first 10 minutes, but we break it down by the timeline, by the room, or by the person. Type help had some various searching and filters to do that in text-based, but it was, it wasn't very sophisticated. And like, again, I don't want to sound like I'm criticizing William here. Like this was made in his spare time for free, But when it came down to like, well, we have the opportunity to make a better interface or a different interface or a more usable interface. How would we do this? And we had discussions about like, well, it can keep track of some of this stuff for you. And famously, and by the way, it's interesting that you say you don't like games with note taking, because some people are the exact opposite and just can't get it. They're like, if a game means I can use a notebook, then I'm so happy, And what most people do, or a lot of people do with type help, is they essentially use a spreadsheet for the notes, because that tends to be the best mechanism to track what is my timeline, what are the rooms, what are the people, and then you're basically looking at it like that. And my version, when I played, I took extensive notes, and I came up with my own kind of format in my notebook to track that. And early on, the discussions were like, well, is that fun? Like, is that the fun part of the game? And I think some people would tell you, oh, making the spreadsheet is the best part of the game. But largely, like on our team, and unfortunately, again, William was on board, it was like, no, the actual puzzle solving should be what's in your head. It shouldn't be about keeping track of what you saw or where things are. Like, it's a computer. It should be able to do that already, and do a lot of your job. So I think some people, I've watched a lot of streamers play the game. Some people will take extensive notes about who's where everywhere, even though the detective interface, the monitor as we call it in the game, keeps track of a lot of that for you. Some people just like writing it down, like it helps them reinforce. But you absolutely don't need to take any notes, I think, to play the game for the most part. I think, especially if you have, but by default, we have this feature called connections, where it shows you a number by some scenes in the timeline that hint that there's some clues to be found, some evidence to uncover. That's on by default, because we felt like the game is reasonably challenging even with that being the case, but some people can turn that off. I think if that's off, you probably will have to take some notes, because it does become, there's quite a few scenes in the game. There's a lot to keep track of. And I think if you didn't have those notes, you'd have to just revisit scenes over and over and over again. And to me, that's not fun. To me, I'd rather, I want the game to keep track of more of that stuff for me. I think if the difficulty in your game comes from the fact that the interface is incomplete, so the user has to make their own interface, like that's fine. That's a kind of game, but that's not the kind of game I was interested in. Like, and I didn't think that was where the beauty of Galley House came from.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I really appreciate all those little touches. Personally, my skills with these kind of games is not high. So it's like when I saw the markers to tell me, oh, there's more clues in this particular scene that you need to be paying attention to, was really helpful. Like, especially how like the story goes backwards and forwards throughout the evening. So to try and keep that in your head, it just made that all a little bit easier. And also the stamps that you included, so if there was a specific moment in the plot line or something that you felt like you needed to, mark on a particular scene, that was really helpful. And even like being able to highlight certain sentences from each transcript, which would then go into a separate journal. But it just all felt really player thoughtful, where a lot of games are not like that. And I think that was an endearing feature of the game, where it felt like you were really thinking about us as well as making a good game.
I really care personally about user interface and things being smooth and easy to use. It's interesting because like a lot of people will define UI as looks good. And I think that's part of it, but that's not even where my strengths fully lie. Like, I think mine is more about trying to make it easy and intuitive and offering a player a bunch of different ways to do things and trying to accommodate. We watch a lot of people play the game and see like, well, what did they try to do? And even on our team, like a lot of the things we've discussed, like came from different people. Like, I think Jeremy did the first pass of the UI. Then I put it in the game and it was totally different. And then we tested it. And then when Jay came on board, like, this is all to say, like, we just kept working on it. And I think some programmers or developers, I should say, find UI difficult. They're like, it's just hard to get right. It's time consuming. It's not fun for them compared to the other stuff in the game. They're like, this other stuff is so much more fun to work on. So I'm going to work on that. And I'll just get the basic UI working. Whereas like we found with both of our games is like, if you spend a lot more time on the UI and a lot of time seeing how people use it and trying to make it smooth for them, it really adds a lot to the game. And I think, at least for every game that I work on, I want that to be the case. Like, I want it to be easy to use and inviting. And it's interesting because like not all our experiments even work. Like, there's some features in the UI that are almost never used. It's still fun to think like maybe 1 in 100 players is like, oh, I really love that feature. But we even hide features. The one I like to give as an example, which most players don't stumble upon, is like, so the game is, I mentioned the original game has file names, and in this you're still building the file names, or we call them scene codes in Galley House, by moving knobs and stuff. And you end up with a code that's like 01QU111 or something like that. And occasionally the game tells you those codes, but usually they're just kind of secondary to you thinking about where people are and at what time. And if you just type in one of those codes in the notebook, it automatically, if you found it, it makes a hyperlink automatically. And if you click on that, it takes you to that scene. So if you just happen to be taking notes, we never explain this, but if you just happen to be taking notes in the game and you put in one of those codes because you think it's important, you'll see it goes gray and then it's hyperlinked once you've discovered that scene. And like, that's the kind of thing I love as a person who uses software and who builds software. It's like just something that we saw people do. And when they do it, they'll be pleasantly surprised when it works that way, So yeah, and again, that just comes down to just spending a lot of time and revisiting the UI over and over and over again until we feel like it's good enough to ship.
Man, you just blow my mind. Oh, wow. I really wish I'd known or found that one.
It's not necessary. It's not necessary though.
No,
yeah, it's just a feature for some people. Yeah.
No, I would have loved that though. That would have been great. Yeah, but I mean, even so, like, I mean, I played this on the Steam Deck and it plays great on the Steam Deck.
Yeah.
Stumbling on the touch controls was really was a great moment for me. We're being able to touch the machine to set all the different settings just by using the screen. It was great.
And honestly, like, we have more work to do there. Like, we have some, like, the game is shipped and we have some bug reports, and when you first ship a game, you have to deal with it crashing and all that stuff. But now we're getting to the stuff that it's like quality of life things we didn't have time to do. And one of the big ones is even better touch support, because not everything, we got most things working, but I want the game to work like 100% on touch, like we wouldn't even have to use the controller at all.
Yeah.
I think we're close, so I'd like to do that.
Man, I feel like a replay is going to be in order next year, I think. Sounds great. As we take a little break from the interview, I would just like to mention our Patreon. If you would like to support us, this would be the best way to do it. With just 2 tiers to choose from and a host of benefits waiting, it's the perfect time to join in. From early access to our work, to a chance to write an article for the newsletter, we hope there is something for everyone. With our lowest tier at £1 and our top at £4.50, we hope we've made our Patreon as accessible as possible. And don't forget, I still have game codes to give away to anyone who signs up to any paid tier, including Blippo Plus, Thank Goodness You're Here, Ultros, and many more. A massive thank you goes out to our current patrons, John, Ruz, Keris, Antonia, Shy Guy, Brian, Opera Queen, and Y. You guys rule, and we're incredibly lucky to have your support. Please check out patreon.com/so-many-games to see everything we have to offer. A link can be found in the show description. With that said, let's head back to the interview. I want to bring up the hint system that you implemented into the game as well, because I really, really love this hint system that you've put in. I feel it's one that any type of game like this should use, because it really helped me out in a lot of instances where I didn't feel stupid, but I felt like I just had the nudges to get to where I needed to go. And for anybody who doesn't know, this particular hint system, it will give you hints, little clues, little nudges to where you need to be going to. And depending on where you are, it could be 1 or 2, or it could be 5 or 6. But even then, if you're still stuck, you can't really figure it out, it will just give you the answer eventually. And I just really appreciated that system. What can you tell us about how you landed on that particular style and how it was implemented into the game?
This is something that was really important to me when Jeremy and I first started talking about Roottrees. When we had those first, we had a couple long phone calls where we just talked for hours about how could this game look, And one of the things I said is I think it should have a hint system built in. And Jeremy was like, I wouldn't say he might correct me. I'm speaking for him here and I might get it wrong, but I don't think he was as enthusiastic about it as I was. But my argument was, and this is something I think Ron Gilbert, the designer of Monkey Island, has said, which is if you don't include a hint system in your game, it doesn't stop people from using hints. It just means the internet is your hint system.
Yeah.
And there's a big thing, and there's an important thing there, is that when you go to the internet to look for a hint, which is something I've done in many games and probably every gamer has done, is the internet doesn't know your context. It doesn't know what you've seen, what you've achieved, or whatnot. So it's very easy to spoil yourself on it or get the wrong level of the hint. So I was like, if we build this hint system into Roottrees, we talked a bunch, Jeremy and I, back and forth of how that would work. And I was like, but we did always want to know, we wanted it to be a gradual thing where it gives you, have you tried this? Or you try to give a player an abstract thing, consider this. And then it works more towards and then eventually the last step is tell them what to do. And it was hard. It was really hard to build that. And then I did a full pass and it was quite bad. And then we hired someone from our community who really helped out, and a fan of the Roottrees free version who re-edited all the hints. And she did an amazing job. So yeah, when we came to Galley House, I said to William, when we had our phone call, I was like, it's very important to me that this has hints. because I considered it a big part of Roottree's success. Like I would say it was even a must-have for me. Like it's like this is a non-negotiable to me, is that this game is going to have hints, and and William agreed. So he ended up. We didn't do the exact same hint system. Like it's presented the same way. It's like a box, and you say give me more, and it's gradual. The what is different is how the game decides what hint to give you. But it's fundamentally the same premise, which is the game knows exactly what you found. And it knows this is, I think, the next thing you should go for. Like it has a pretty good idea of that. You might disagree. And some of our players have said, well, the hint told me to go for this, and I think it should have done that. But it turns out that's a very hard problem. But we have at least a loose idea of where you should go. And then, yeah, him and Jay implemented it in this game at pretty much the same mechanism. And, and then it's a bunch of work, and then we had to re-edit it. And I had to do multiple playthroughs of the game from beginning to end, just using hint. And honestly, even after we shipped the game, we've added a bunch of hints because we've seen places that we missed it, or that people felt the hint was too specific. But I think it's like, yeah, I don't know. Like I have spoken to other game developers who I respect like very much, and they've said like, I don't want the players using hints. They want the player to get stuck, really think about it, because it'll feel so good when they finally get it. And I get that, but like I understand there's this temptation for people to use too many hints, but I think that problem is overstated. I think most people don't want to keep using hints nonstop. They just want they want to tip in, like, just get me, I feel stuck now. I don't know what to do next. If I only had an idea, and this idea that you would make your hint system deliberately worse in order to stop the very small percentage of players who would just abuse it to the point where they wouldn't have fun seems ridiculous to me. And then it goes back to what Ron Gilbert said, which is like, you can't even stop them. Someone can just go open up a walkthrough on their phone and just follow it anyway. So you're not really helping them. But yeah, I feel, again, any puzzle game I do from now on will have a comprehensive hint system built in, because you can't design a game for every mind and every player, and it's a good way of making sure that people don't, just bail on the game, which is the worst case scenarios. They're so frustrated and they're like, forget it.
I've been there with these specific type of puzzle games. I've been there where I've like, I don't want to play this because it's not clicking with me. Although I'll take that back. I want to play this, but I don't want to play this, if that makes sense, because the puzzle that the game is asking me to try and solve, I just can't solve it. And like you say, I just need that little nudge in the right direction, and it'll probably click for me. And as you say, you could just go on the internet and watch someone do it and then go back to the game. But what I like about how you put this hint system is that, you don't break from the game. You don't break the immersion of doing that. And like you say, you don't risk something being spoiled for you either as you're scrubbing through the walkthrough or trying to find where you are, and etc. So, I mean, I do really feel quite passionate about there's a case for like it's like mandatory to have something like this in these type of games.
Yeah, I think more games should do it, honestly. I play a lot of video games, and even some games that aren't like primarily puzzle games, I get stuck. I'm replaying Resident Evil 2 right now, and I got stuck. I'm like, I don't know where to go next. And I had to look up an FAQ. You inevitably get on this website that loads 1 million banner ads and 10 auto-playing videos. And it's like, my phone is crashing, and it's like, and it's still hard to find exactly where I am. And I was just like, that could, they could have a hint. Capcom is a big enough team that they could have a hint. I will say there is the opposite side where it's like the second God of War game on PS5, or is it PS4? The second one, of the new generation of God of War games, like, is infamous in that your sidekick character is constantly telling you what to do before you've even done it. Yeah. So I think it really should be, there should be a button or something to make the hint come out, rather than, hey, have you considered doing this before you even looked around? They're saying, you should pull that rope. What's that rope? And I'm like, I haven't seen the rope yet. Like, I haven't even looked around. Like, that's supremely irritating to me. So
yeah, definitely. And it is quite easy to put a toggle in the options and turn the hint system off, turn it on, and then you're kind of pleasing both sides of the audience. Yeah, just a bit of a no-brainer for me, and it just really captured my attention. This particular hint system, it was just wonderful.
I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah,
It is interesting to think about like how you design a game for all these different people. Like it's not unusual to have a game that has like easy, medium, hard, for action games. And so we kind of understand that a player is kind of responsible for their own enjoyment in a certain aspect. Like you should be able to customize the game somewhat to you, but hints largely haven't done this. We're not the only game with a hint system like this. There's other games, but like I just think like I know for whatever reason, a lot of games in this genre don't do it, haven't invested as much as we have into making sure that works really smoothly.
No, but I mean, it just elevates my interest in your studio as well, because I will want to play your next game more so as well, because I'll know there's going to be a good hint system buried in there, ready to go.
Well, that's awesome to hear.
But of course, back to the incident at Galley House, and I think the other side of the game that I really enjoyed was the visuals. There were, I mean, like, all the different rooms were really visualized really nicely, very detailed, very busy. Really felt like the era that the game was based in. And I liked all the different character models were all very interesting to look at. Do you think this side of the game was the longest part of the process of making the game, or was it quite smooth sailing?
So we worked with Henning Ludvigsson, who is a board game artist. He was actually the artist who did Roottrees Are Dead as well. And we found, again, we had a good relationship with him, Jeremy and I. He was really good at meeting deadlines, getting work done and stuff like that. So very early on, I was very happy to find out that William liked his art too and was like, I think this is a good match. So he's really good at, we give him a very detailed brief that I think Jeremy is largely responsible for. Like he's good at sitting down and writing in detail. We need this angle. We need this, I think with Galley House, we even went more detailed. And because it was a house, one thing that like, I really wanted the house to make sense. Like I wanted to make sure that this room was next to this room or this room was above this room. And we had some discussions of how the house could be laid out. And then I did a rough version because like I do some 3D modeling. And like, so I modeled the house in 3D, and then we gave that to Hennig as part of the brief. Like, here's where the walls need to be. Can you fill in the room? Here's some angles that we think could work. And then he's just an expert at what he does. Like I think he's done over 450 board games. It's probably 500 now. He's just really prolific, and he's really good at what he does. And like he does most of his work is in 3D. I believe he uses Maya, and he like, so all the rooms, the background art are all 3D rendered. And then he'll do a pass in Photoshop to, touch it up, add things that like maybe the 3D software doesn't do so well and things like that. Add scratches here, cobwebs here and stuff like that. And if you look at his portfolio of board games, like he's done a lot of like dark horror and stuff like that. So it was like a particularly good fit for Galley House. Oh, the other nice thing about the 3D aspects is that, again, this is a minor spoiler, but you will see some of the same rooms at different times, and we have different times of day. And it allowed us, because it's 3D, you could render it with different lights and turn off the candles here and just do daylight and stuff like that. That was really cool. But for the characters, those are all painted, digital art. He also does, hand stuff. I think sometimes he will, like for posing, he might use the 3D software to make a pose, and then he'll draw the character on top of it. But it's just a very pleasant experience with him. We knew art takes time. So it was a very high priority to get the art briefs out as early as possible so that he could start doing those. And then there was often times where we would be like, well, could you prioritize this one? Like because we're close in the game to having access to this. And then he was really good at working back and forth because, I was about to spoil something, so I'm just gonna keep my mouth shut. But no, that was really smooth. I would say he was probably doing art right up until the beta of the game, and then even then we added again scope creep. We can't hold back. Like the first title page of the game was just a black screen that said that had the logo, and we lived with that even into the early testing. But we really wanted a picture of the house, so we're like, let's make new art here, and he's really good at that. I would say that that was a big piece, but the voice acting was also another big piece, in particular because you want to make sure the script is locked before you ever pay someone to step in a studio, and then you have to make the time to do it. And then once you've done that, you have to chop it up. And then Jeremy did all the staging of each scene where, it's all 2D artwork, and there's very few animations. I think none from the characters, because again, there's budgetary limitations that we had, because even though the budget for this game was bigger than Roottrees, we're still a small studio. We still have to make we still have to make our money go really far. And so the coming down to the staging, as we called it, of the scenes, it's about moving those 2D characters around. Like when this character says this line, they should be at this position in the screen, at this depth, facing this way. And it turns out when you have like 100 scenes, that's a significant amount of work. So that was also a huge aspect of the development. So I think, yeah, those three things together probably took the most amount of work.
Yeah, I want to talk about more about the voice acting in a second, but there was one more question about the character models, and they're all stationary models. They don't really move at all. And was that a time limiting decision, or was that something you were aiming for?
It was. I think we always, like when we're trying to come up with a budget for the game and like how can we make this work with, knowing that art is generally one of the more expensive aspects of the games to make. In the beginning, we imagined it more like a visual novel where you would see the character, just one static image of the character, maybe a couple expressions, very close to the camera right up at the front. And that's how we thought we would do it. But then we did some experiments and we're like, well, what if we still had the static art assets and just, positioned them in the scenes? And we know this doesn't look the best, but it's an interesting compromise that we can do. And we all really liked the way it looked. There are some places where it falls down. Like if a character sits down or lies down, we couldn't have bespoke art for all those actions because it very quickly balloons. I think there's something like 25 potential positions for a character to be. And then one thing we haven't discussed is that when the player starts the game, everything is a silhouette and you have to choose. One of the puzzles of the game is figuring out what does each person look like. And because of that, that meant that any character could be in any of those positions, so that you very quickly realize that explodes the combinations. Like you're talking about, instead of drawing, let's say, a dozen characters, you're drawing hundreds because there's a dozen times 25 positions. It's not exactly that, but it is still hundreds of pieces of art. And that was just out of the question. Like just Hennig couldn't do that much. Like our time and our budget would explode. So it was all about working within those limitations. It would have been interesting. I have thought since, like, what if we 3D modeled each character? But then I don't know that the art style would have matched the backgrounds as much. Like game development comes down to like a zillion little decisions and you're constantly choosing like, how will this look good enough? Will this be okay? Can we live with this? And you inevitably end up shipping some things that like if I'm going to be honest, I would have loved if the characters did have full animations, maybe not for every single thing they did, but maybe a handful of animations each, and that each character could sit down or lie down, and like that would have been really cool. But it was just, yeah, it wasn't to be for this game.
I quite like the stationary models. I felt like it gave the game a certain vibe that I really liked. And especially like, this game doesn't just have 3 or 4 characters. There's multitudes of different characters. I mean, how many is there? Is there like 15 or something?
Yeah, I'll say there's at least a dozen.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to spoil. But
yeah. Like, to do that for all those different characters for that amount, it's a hell of a lot of work. But like I say, I think the stationary models really work too.
I mean, we came up with some, lore explanations too. Like, the machine I mentioned came out of the desire to have a controller support for the game. But like we eventually said, like this machine is listening and reconstructing. You're seeing a hallucination of what happened. And because of that, it's not perfect. So you're not getting a perfect representation. The audio is perfect. Like we're very clear about that. The audio is exactly what happened, but what you're seeing is kind of in your head. And, we apply some, like at the edges of the screen, you probably noticed are waving around like it to give you this like hallucinatory effect. And yeah, I think there's something to be said for, again, you have a limitation, and we know it's like, a person who's used to a game like a AAA game where everything's animated, they're going to look at it and be like, oh, that's weird that they don't animate. But we're consistent with it. We stuck to it. We never, this is the way the game looks. We've made sure this looks the best it can, giving those limitations. And I think most people just accept it and are happy. There's been a few minor complaints, like I said. I think that's maybe why I got a little defensive. But it's like, yeah, there's some people who are like, I can't believe you didn't animate every single thing. And then we tell them, well, that's expensive. And then they're like, oh, fair enough. Yeah.
But I'm glad they took it in a positive way. But I don't know. I just don't know if there's a certain charm in the game because of the character models that might get lost if they were like fully moving characters.
It would have been very different. But I've always thought, yeah, consistency is a very important thing. Like people, I've noticed when like I watch TV shows or movies or weird science fiction concepts that make no sense, like users tend to accept them as long as it's consistent within its own universe. What they really hate is not that something is far-fetched, it's that it breaks its own rules. That's what people don't like.
But yeah, well, let's just move over to the voice acting just to finish off, actually. And this was another extraordinarily strong point for me in the game, because the voice acting is incredible. Like, I mean, I've obviously played quite a lot of games in the past that have had great voice acting, but the cast that you got together for this game, they just felt like they were so on point and so op for voicing these characters. Putting this voice cast together, was it planned? Was it all planned? Did you know who you wanted, or was it all happenstance in the end?
No, we didn't. My initial thing for the game, like when I played the initial text-based version and read the transcripts, I was like, this reads like a script to me. Like there's a full scene here. And I was like, I would love to hear this. Like that's just what I kept thinking. It's like I feel like professional voice actors could do just such a great job with this. And that was one of my primary motivations for wanting to work on this project, because I was like, the game is already good and the puzzles are already good, but it would just be really cool. I would just want to hear it. I just want to hear what a professional would do with this. And it's interesting because like I think there's some other respected people I know who I spoke to about this, and they're like, no, I don't want to hear that. I think that would ruin it. And even William, it's not that he was against it. It was just that he's like, I'm a bad person to ask about this because I usually skip dialogue anyway. But he was like, but I think you're on, like, I think this is a good value add to the game. Like this would be something. And then everyone came around. Like once we started to get the samples, everyone was like, oh no, this is so good. This adds so much to the game. I guess the tricky thing is that you're kind of competing with someone's imagination. Like if you've read the game, you have a voice in mind, and then you hear who we've cast, and it might not match up and you might not like that. But there's many, many more people who have never read it, who are just experiencing the game for the first time. So yeah, it was always baked into the game's design was going to be like, we're going to have good voice acting. And I think I mentioned earlier that we very quickly realized we didn't know what we were doing. And that's what we hired Kirsty. And she did just an incredible job. She's a pro at this. She's done so many big games. Like she was heavily involved in, she did a lot of the directing for Baldur's Gate 3. She did like, Metaphor ReFantasio. She's just worked on a ton of games, and she knew a lot of actors, and she put out the casting call, and she gave us, like, for each role, I think she gave us 5 primary picks, 5 secondary picks. And I was honestly just blown away. Like for the most part, I was like, any of these 5 primary could do an amazing job. And that's when I realized that there's just so many talented actors out there. Like I know it's a really hard job. Like a lot of people, maybe not, I don't know if this is as true in the UK, but here you sometimes hear people like, oh, my dream is to move to Hollywood and make it as a star. And you're like, well, that's a ridiculous dream, because almost nobody succeeds at that. And that's probably the truth. Like, but there's just these people who are they've been acting their whole lives, no matter what. Like some of them, do it from home. It's like a side gig. Some of them, just eke out a living. And then there's some of the ones we got are like stage professionals. In each case, yeah, it was just like Kirsty brought us this handful, and we were just like spoiled for choice. And like sometimes I'm like, yeah, I was like, any of these would have been good. Now, having said that, I was really happy that like all of our first choices accepted the gig. And yeah, and like when we started getting, I sat in on almost every recording session, and Jeremy did sit in on every single one, but I was there for like 95% of them, and it was just a joy to just hear these people work. And often, like I mentioned earlier, like sometimes things don't match up with your head, but it was so interesting to me to hear the choices they made. Like you give them a line and you have an idea of how that line would be read, and they read it a totally different way, and you're like, oh, that does make sense, and then I get to have a professional like Kirsty tell them like, oh, I think you lost your accent there, or let's try it like this. And then like almost always it just came out better. So yeah, that was just a joy. That I wish I could take more credit for how that came out, but it was really just about, working with a really talented director and who hired really talented actors.
Yeah, because it's interesting you say like where William kind of skips dialogue sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm like that too sometimes. A lot of reading can just make me feel tired. And it kind of, just makes me groggy. But with this voice acting, they just grabbed my attention every time. It just made me pay attention to and obviously that's important in this type of game where you've got to pay attention to literally everything that anybody's saying. But it really heightened my attention to make sure I was doing that. Which I don't think I would have done if it was just dialogue. And it was kind of funny as well because it felt to me a little bit like the voice acting worked really well with the stationary character models, which just made me, just like them even more. I think it was an interesting mix, and I think it worked well.
Yeah, again, I think a lot of it just came the stationary thing. It was a nice mix. We've said they're stationary, but if you see the game the way it works, there's actually an effect applied to them, which is basically like an audio effect. Again, because audio is so important to the game, I was constantly pushing for it as a theme. The logo of the game, besides the words "the incident at," has these have these modulated voice patterns. Kind of like when you're looking at a sound wave. I can see one in this podcast we're recording right now. And as the music goes, they're bouncing up and down. And that's a cue. That's a clue that this game is about audio. It's about listening. And the machine is about listening to the past. And when characters are on the screen and they're stationary, they're not at the artwork is stationary, but we're applying a sound wave modulative to them too. So as they're speaking, they're getting distorted and stuff like that. And it's really fun to see that match, because when they're getting angry, it distorts more. So it's a bit like an animation, but again, a lot of that came from budget, and we're like, well, how can we make this a little more visually pleasing and still lean into the theme of it being audio?
I've got a question from one of our patrons that I just need to fire at you. They'd love to hear more about how you go about coming up with the puzzles and challenges. Specifically, how do you know how well balanced a challenge is when you are also the person that came up with it? But he needs more directing this towards the Roottrees.
So for the basic, Roottrees is 2 games if you get it on Steam. There's the Roottrees Are Dead, and there's Roottree Mania. And I was much more involved in Roottree Mania, which was the additional content. But even then, it would be unfair, I think, for me to fully answer this question, because most of those puzzles, the vast majority were designed by Jeremy Johnson and type help William. Now, having said that, in both games, I'll skip the answer. The answer is playtesting. You have an idea in your head of how a puzzle will work, but you don't really know until you sit people down. And some things that seem brilliant, even talking amongst ourselves, oh, that's such a good idea, no one will ever miss that. And you throw it down and everyone misses it. And then you're like, well, so it's just about observing how people do it, listening to their feedback, but watching their playtests. We pretty much, for almost every player, we insist on videotaping themselves play the game, so we can see what are they clicking on, what are they missing, what are they doing when they're frustrated, and then adjusting things based on that. And then we continue to do it now, even now that the game is launched. It's because there's people post threads, I didn't understand this puzzle. So last week we released a patch that tries to fix one of the end game puzzles, or not fix, but smooth it down, So I think that's the best answer, is you start with your intuition, your gut instinct, you implement it, and then you have first the people on the team try it, then you have people outside the team try it, and you just keep iterating until you're happy with it. I think it would be impossible to just get it right the first time. I don't think there's any, I'm not saying I'm a great game designer or great game producer, but even the best one in the world, I think, needs to have people test.
Yeah, definitely. Playtesting is very important, much more important than I think people realize sometimes.
Yeah.
Thanks to Brian for that question. Really, really appreciate him sending that one in. And just to finish the interview, Robin, I always like to ask this question. And the question is can you describe the incident at Galley House with just one word? Oh,
that's so hard. We had a hard enough time, describing it in a dozen words for the Steam one-liner. Part of me wants to say confusing. I'm going to go with confusing. And I think confusing, and I'm going to say why now, which is more words, but I'm going to stick to it there's just one word, which is the Incident at Galley House is a game that deliberately confuses you at the beginning and then trusts you to figure it out. And I think that some games are afraid to confuse the player, and our game is not. It's like part of the story and the way it unfolds. And I think that's a fun aspect. Like, I think more than mysterious, it's confusing. And that shouldn't be a bad word. It should be let's try to unconfuse ourselves and see where that goes.
It was an absolute delight to talk with Robin about the Roottrees and the incident at Galley House. Hearing the stories of the development was just fascinating, and Robin was so kind to share the information he did on them. To keep up to date with Robin and Evil Trout, then the best way would be to follow them on BlueSky or to visit the Evil Trout website. Links, as always, in the show description. And I'd just like to thank Robin for sharing some of his spare time to talk to me about the games. And before I leave you, I would just like to remind you all that we have a Discord server where you can chat to the So Many Games crew and other like-minded people on video games, life and our work. We'd love for you to be a part of our community, so do come and say hello and let us know what you've been playing. Don't forget to check out somanygames.co.uk, which is full of amazing reviews, articles and interviews. Thank you for listening, and until next time, please take care out there and happy gaming.